It began, as many soft mysteries do, in a place no one expected. Summer was not born into quietness, but into the hum of a household that never slept. The clatter of Rick's machines, the drifting sighs of her parents, the uneven rhythm of Morty's restless nights, all of it stitched itself into her earliest memories. She learned, before words had formed fully in her mouth, that life would rarely be calm, and so she carried her own calmness like a lantern. It wasn't loud, it wasn't brilliant, but it flickered in her, steady and stubborn, as though some part of her had known from the start that her role was never to outshine, but to anchor. She remembered, even as a child, how often she lingered at the edges of Rick's experiments, not close enough to be noticed, not far enough to be gone. He would mutter equations into the stale air, machines sputtering, and though she couldn't understand the language of wires and glass, she felt a strange intimacy with the cadence. It was like overhearing a lullaby in another tongue. You couldn't know the meaning, but you knew you were meant to listen. Something in her leaned toward that hum, as though she already sensed her part in it would come later. Morty was different, fragile in ways Summer never allowed herself to be. He was easily shaken, his heart cracked open by every passing cruelty of the world. She loved him in a way that made her seem sharp, but it wasn't sharpness at all. It was a strange tenderness, unpolished, the only kind she knew. At night, when he woke from dreams of falling, she would nudge his shoulder and whisper something nonsensical, something she'd forget by morning. Yet he would always settle, like she'd placed a blanket across his fears. That was the first time she realized she could soften storms without naming them. Her mother, Beth, seemed a mirror and a warning both. Summer studied her like one studies the ocean, with awe, with fear, with quiet recognition. Beth's sharpness was survival, but her survival carried loneliness, and Summer feared becoming her. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and tilted her chin just so to see if she already carried that same haunted edge. And when she did, she hummed, softly, without thought, as though the sound could smooth her own sharpness back into roundness. But it was Rick who carried the strange thread that tugged at her life's quiet pattern. He never meant to shape her, not deliberately. Yet his presence pulled on her like gravity. She remembered one evening, the house awash in the scent of burned metal, when Rick, tired beyond measure, left his tools scattered across the floor. She was small then, perhaps 10, but she picked them up carefully one by one, arranging them in a neat line. He noticed, of course. Rick noticed everything, even if he rarely spoke of it. For a moment, his eyes lingered on her, and though his mouth said nothing, his gaze carried an unspoken acknowledgement. She had a place in this chaos. In the years to come, those moments multiplied quietly. Summer grew not into brilliance like Rick, nor fragility like Morty, but into something subtler, a keeper of balance. She became the steadying voice at the dinner table, the one who could cut through Rick's sarcasm with plain honesty, or soothe Beth's weary heart with a gesture so small it barely seemed to matter. And yet, those small gestures did matter. They lingered. They softened the hard corners of the family in ways none of them would admit aloud. One night, under a sky that seemed too vast for the backyard to contain, Summer stretched out on the grass with Morty beside her. He was quiet, unusually so, staring upward with eyes that betrayed the weight of things too strange for a boy to hold. She reached over, held his wrist gently, and said only, "It's okay. Just breathe." He did. And though he never thanked her, never turned his head to meet her eyes, the tension in his chest loosened, and she felt it. She had given him something invisible, but real. The stars were endless that night. Summer gazed at them until her eyelids grew heavy, wondering if perhaps they were listening. She wondered if her role in this strange family was already written somewhere among those distant points of light. And in the quiet, where her breath blended with Morty's, where the world seemed both infinite and tender, she hummed again, that soft, nameless tune that always found her. It was the first thread of a story that had yet to fully unravel. A story not about battles or brilliance, but about the gentle work of holding things together. And though Summer did not know it then, the role she was growing into was already whispering itself through her nights, waiting patiently for her to notice. The days that followed were not marked by great upheavals or cosmic revelations, but by the quiet rhythm of a household trying to remain whole. Summer often felt as though she were walking between worlds, one foot in the ordinary, where school assignments and whispered gossip carried weight, and the other brushing against something stranger, older, something that hummed just beyond the veil of sight. It wasn't that she wanted the chaos Rick carried with him, nor that she fully understood the gravity of Morty's constant entanglement in it. But she felt it all the same, like a pressure in the air before a storm, a subtle reminder that her life would never truly be small. At school, she tried to blend into patterns that never quite fit. Friends laughed about small heartbreaks, about shoes and television, and though she laughed with them, she sometimes felt a step removed, as though her attention was stretched elsewhere. She had nights full of whispers she couldn't explain, dreams, where voices called her by name in rooms she had never seen, yet which smelled faintly of Rick's garage. Sometimes she woke with the taste of metal on her tongue, as though she had swallowed starlight in her sleep. These dreams left her staring at the ceiling, wondering if perhaps she had been meant for something stranger than she dared to admit aloud. Her bond with Morty deepened, though it was rarely spoken. He had a way of stumbling into her room late at night, restless from another one of Rick's adventures, his eyes wide, his voice unsteady. Summer never demanded explanations. She simply shifted over, letting him sit or collapse beside her, while she listened to his breathing slow. Once, when he finally muttered, "I don't know how to handle all of it," she answered with a softness that startled even herself. "You don't have to. You just have to still be you tomorrow." Morty didn't reply, but she felt his shoulders ease, and she realized then that her strength wasn't in the loud gestures she once thought she needed to make, but in these quiet moments of stillness. Rick, too, had begun to notice. Not with words, he was never generous with those, but in small pauses. He would sometimes glance at her when she lingered at the doorway of the garage, his eyes squinting as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite name. He never invited her in, never explained his work, but he didn't dismiss her either. And once, when she picked up a fallen notebook and handed it back, his muttered thanks carried a weight that surprised them both. It was not gratitude for the object itself, but for the unspoken understanding that she was present in his world, even if he didn't want to admit it. Beth, meanwhile, moved like a storm cloud through their lives, her edges hard with years of unfulfilled longing. Summer saw in her mother a reflection of what it meant to live unnoticed, to carry strength without acknowledgement. And so, in small ways, Summer tried to be gentle with her, washing the dishes without being asked, leaving a folded blanket on the couch when she knew Beth would fall asleep there, sometimes even sitting silently nearby when Beth stared into her glass of wine. These weren't grand acts. gifts, but they were hers, and they planted in her a sense that maybe her role was not to change the world, but to keep it from breaking further. It was during one such night, when the house had sunk into its usual uneven silence, that Summer felt something different. The dream came again, but sharper this time. She was standing in a vast hall with no walls, stars scattered like dust across the floor. A voice, neither male nor female, called her name in a tone so familiar it made her chest ache. When she reached for it, the voice only whispered, "Anchor." She woke with a start, breath caught, the word echoing through her like a heartbeat. She didn't understand it, not yet, but she felt its weight. It was not a dream that drifted away like smoke. It stayed. The next morning, she caught Rick watching her longer than usual. He said nothing, but when he turned back to his work, she thought she saw the faintest twitch of recognition cross his features, as though he knew something she did not. Summer didn't press him. Instead, she carried the word with her into the day, repeating it under her breath like a secret prayer. Anchor. She didn't yet know what it meant for her future, but she felt the story of her life shifting ever so slightly, like a ship adjusting its course in the night, quiet but irreversible. The word stayed with her, quiet but insistent, as though it had stitched itself into the rhythm of her breathing. Anchor. It echoed in her steps at school, in the clinking of cutlery at dinner, in the low murmur of televisions, in the background when the family tried to act ordinary. Summer did not speak it aloud, not even once, but she carried it carefully, like a stone hidden in her pocket. She didn't know what it meant, not fully, but she sensed that it belonged to her in a way nothing else ever had. And though she couldn't explain it, she felt that if she ever lost it, she would lose a piece of herself. Morty noticed something different about her, though he never asked. He would look at her sometimes with the same bewildered gaze he reserved for Rick's impossible machines, as though she had become a puzzle that unsettled him. Once when they sat together in the living room, he finally muttered, "You're acting weird." Summer didn't answer. She only smiled, a small, knowing smile, and kept her eyes on the flickering light of the screen. Morty shifted uncomfortably, but, in the quiet that followed, he leaned closer without realizing it, as though some part of him felt steadier beside her. Rick's awareness was subtler, but sharper. He had a way of noticing without acknowledging, of storing details for later dissection. One evening, when Summer entered the garage to bring him coffee, something she rarely did, his eyes flickered to hers in a glance that lasted longer than usual. He didn't ask why she had come, didn't mock her, as he might have in the past. Instead, he accepted the cup with a grunt, and when she turned to leave, he called after her. "Don't lose yourself in all this, kid." His voice was hoarse, almost unwilling, but it carried something deeper than she expected. For a brief moment, she wondered if he too had heard the word. Anchor. Her dreams deepened as the nights passed, no longer fleeting whispers, but entire landscapes unfurling in her sleep. She walked across endless plains of glass that reflected, constellations above her, and each step hummed with a low, resonant tone. Sometimes the voice returned, soft and close, telling her that she was not meant to wander, but to hold. She woke from these visions with a strange calmness, as though part of her had been steadied while the rest of the world spun wildly. She began to hum without realizing it, the same soft tune that had followed her since childhood, and it felt, now less like a habit and more like a memory she had never lived. Beth, caught in her own orbit of weariness, noticed too. One night, when Summer offered to help clear the table, Beth looked at her strangely, as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Instead, she only said, "You're different lately. Stronger, maybe." Summer didn't know how to respond. She only nodded, keeping the word tucked silently in her chest, unwilling to share it even with her mother. It felt too delicate, too sacred to name aloud. Yet beneath all of this, there was a sense of approaching change. Summer could feel it, subtle but steady, like the air thickening before rain. It wasn't a fear, not exactly, but an anticipation that unsettled her. She began noticing how often Rick disappeared for longer stretches, how Morty returned looking more worn, how Beth's eyes lingered on the door, as if waiting for something that never came. Summer felt herself drawn into the spaces between these moments, into the silence where no one else seemed to look. She found herself holding things together quietly, slipping an arm around Morty when he trembled, distracting Beth with gentle conversation, keeping Rick's garage tidier than he realized. She didn't know why she did it, only that it felt necessary, as though she was keeping the household from unraveling at the seams. Then came the night when she woke not from a dream, but into one. The air in her room shimmered faintly, as though the moonlight itself had bent to watch her. For a moment she thought she was still asleep, but when she touched the wall, it was solid. The whisper returned, closer than ever before, filling her chest like a second heartbeat. "Anchor." This time it did not fade. She felt it sink into her, as though the word itself had become part of her blood. And as she lay back down, trembling, but calm, she realized that her role was no longer waiting in the distance. It was already here, already beginning to unfold, and she could no longer pretend not to notice. The morning after the shimmering night, Summer moved through the house as though carrying a secret too heavy for words. The whisper still pulsed faintly, in her chest, not gone, not fading, but living quietly inside her. She noticed the way her hands felt steadier than usual when she buttered her toast, the way her breathing came slower, more deliberate, as though her body already knew it was meant to be still in a world of motion. Morty sat across from her, eyes tired, shoulders slumped, and though he said nothing, she reached out without thinking and nudged his plate closer. He gave her a small glance, uncertain, but he ate. That was enough. Rick stumbled in moments later, smelling of oil and smoke, muttering half-finished sentences about dimensional interference. He poured coffee without looking at either of them, but Summer felt his eyes linger briefly, just long enough to remind her of the night before. She wondered, just for a moment, if he could sense what she carried now, or if the silence in him was deliberate, a kind of unspoken recognition. She didn't ask. She only hummed softly to herself, the tune barely audible, but enough to draw Morty's gaze and make Rick's muttering falter for a heartbeat. The day unfolded like any other, yet everything seemed touched by a hidden weight. At school, Summer's friends laughed about trivial dramas, but her mind was elsewhere, tracing the word that hummed like a thread through her thoughts. Anchor. She began to notice how she positioned herself unconsciously, always in the middle of a group, always the one bridging gaps in conversations, smoothing over silences, redirecting tensions. It felt less like habit and more like instinct, as though some part of her knew her place was never at the edges but at the center, keeping everything connected. That night, when Morty returned home late, his steps uneven, his eyes carrying the sharp tremor of whatever chaos Rick had dragged him into, Summer was waiting. She didn't question him. She simply took his backpack from his shoulder, set it gently aside, and guided him toward the couch. Morty collapsed with a sigh that seemed older than him, his small hands fidgeting nervously. Summer sat beside him, close but not smothering, and spoke in the soft tone she had only recently discovered in herself. "You're here now. That's enough." He didn't answer, but she felt him lean ever so slightly toward her, like a weary branch bending into the support of another. She stayed there until his breathing evened out, until the restless energy drained from him and left him still. Rick watched them from the doorway. He didn't speak, but the faint twitch of his jaw betrayed something he rarely allowed anyone to see. For a fleeting moment, Summer felt the quiet acknowledgement pass between them again, the unspoken truth that she was stepping into a role neither of them had expected, but which had already begun to matter. Sleep came more easily that night, though it was not empty. Again, the dream returned, the vast hall of stars stretching endlessly before her. But this time, the voice did not call her name. Instead, it whispered a question, slow and deliberate, as though testing her resolve. "Will you hold?" Summer did not answer with words. She only stood taller, feeling the weight in her chest steady like stone, her silence becoming its own response. The stars around her brightened, and the hall seemed to hum with approval before fading back into darkness. When she woke, she found herself gripping the edge of her blanket as though anchoring herself to the waking world. Her pulse was calm, her breath even, but her heart carried the certainty of something irreversible. She was not just witnessing the storm of her family's lives anymore, she was becoming the stillness within it. And though she could not yet see where it would lead, she felt the beginning of a path forming beneath her. Quiet, steady, waiting to be walked. The days that followed settled into a rhythm both ordinary and strange, a balance that only Summer seemed to notice. She moved through the household like someone carrying a lantern, shedding a quiet glow that steadied everything it touched. Morty, though still shaken from Rick's endless experiments, began seeking her presence without asking. He would drift into her room after midnight, restless from nightmares, and she would simply make space for him. She didn't press for details, didn't demand explanations. Her silence was comfort enough, and Morty seemed to draw strength from it, as though her steadiness could seep into his bones. Rick remained unpredictable, a storm of invention and distraction. But even he could not entirely ignore her. One evening, when she lingered in the garage to return a set of tools, he glanced at her longer than necessary. His voice was gruff, but not dismissive when he muttered, "You keep showing up in places you don't belong." Summer almost smiled because she could feel in his words a contradiction. He didn't mean she didn't belong. He meant she was finding her way into spaces he had thought untouchable. She said nothing, only set the tools on the bench, and, for once, Rick didn't chase her out. Beth, too, seemed unsettled by her daughter's quiet transformation. Over dinner, she would watch Summer as though trying to place her. Once she remarked, half to herself, "You're not a kid anymore." Summer didn't respond. She only held her mother's gaze for a moment, letting the silence carry something, softer than words. It was enough to make Beth blink away quickly, as if the recognition of her daughter's steadiness struck too close to her own fragile edges. But it was in the quiet of Summer's dreams where the truth deepened. Night after night, she returned to the star-filled hall, its silence alive with whispers. The voice no longer simply called to her. It waited, testing, asking again and again, "Will you hold?" And though she never spoke, her heart answered, in its own rhythm. With each return, the hall grew clearer, as though her acceptance gave it shape. Once, She touched the shimmering floor and felt a pulse rise through her fingertips, steady and grounding, as if the hall itself were alive and recognizing her. The more these visions returned, the more she noticed her waking life shifting. Her patience stretched longer, her presence steadier. When Morty panicked over something he couldn't articulate, she simply placed her hand on his shoulder until his breathing slowed. When Beth's temper threatened to spill over at the table, Summer redirected the moment with a simple question or a small gesture, dissolving the tension without anyone realizing it. Even Rick, in his own guarded way, seemed to recognize her growing weight. He didn't praise her, he never would, but his silences around her lengthened, and his eyes lingered in ways they hadn't before. Then one night, the dream shifted again. Instead of the endless hall, Summer found herself standing at the edge of a vast sea beneath a starless sky. The water was perfectly still, so calm it reflected her face like glass. The voice rose from beneath its surface, low and resonant, no longer a whisper but something close, intimate. To anchor is not to hold others still. It is to hold yourself when all else drifts. Summer knelt, touched the water, and saw ripples move outward in endless circles, touching a horizon she could not see. Her breath caught, and for the first time she whispered back, her voice soft but certain, "I will." She woke before dawn, the house still heavy with sleep. Yet something in her felt unshakable, as though she had finally accepted what had always been waiting. She rose, walked to the window, and watched the faint silver of morning creep across the sky. The world was still fragile, still loud, still unpredictable, but within her chest the word echoed steadily, a promise now made real. Anchor. She was no longer only holding others together, she was beginning to understand how to hold herself. The silver of dawn faded into the ordinary light of morning, yet Summer carried with her the quiet certainty of what she had whispered in the dream. The house woke slowly, each member of her family caught in their own currents, and Summer found herself moving through it with a sense of stillness she hadn't known before. When Morty shuffled into the kitchen, his hair tangled, his eyes shadowed from another sleepless night, she poured him a glass of orange juice before he asked. He blinked at her, surprised, but accepted it wordlessly. It wasn't the drink that mattered. It was the recognition, the small proof that someone saw him, and that was enough to ease the tightness in his shoulders. Rick entered not long after, muttering about timelines unraveling, about equations no one else would understand. He seemed on the edge of another spiral, ready to drown in his own brilliance and bitterness, when Summer, without planning to, reached across the table and nudged the half-empty coffee pot toward him. He stopped mid-sentence, squinting at her, with that same puzzled frown he wore when a formula didn't match his expectations. For a brief second, the muttering stilled. He poured, drank, and said nothing more. But Summer caught the faintest flicker in his gaze, a recognition he would never name aloud, that her presence had steadied something he hadn't realized was slipping. At school that day, the weight of her role pressed against her more strongly than before. She noticed how easily her friends got lost in arguments, how quickly they frayed over nothing. And though she didn't try to be a leader, she found herself offering small words, simple gestures that drew them back from edges they didn't even know they were approaching. A laugh redirected at the right time, a hand placed gently on a shoulder, a moment of eye contact that grounded the drifting. They never noticed the pattern, but Summer did. She could feel it, her instinct sharpening, her role revealing itself. Not just at home, but in every place she touched. The dreams grew heavier as night fell again. This time she did not walk through the hall of stars or stand by the endless sea. Instead, she drifted in a space with no ground beneath her, no horizon to mark her place. She floated, weightless, and for the first time she felt the danger of slipping, of losing herself to the pull of nothingness. Panic whispered at the edges, sharp and cold. Then, as if in answer, she remembered the word, anchor. She spoke it aloud, steady and clear, and at once she felt her body grow heavy, her presence sharp against the void. She was not lost. She was still herself, and that was enough to bring the shape of the dream back into focus. When she woke, her hands were clenched tightly around the bedsheet, her breath slow but deliberate. She lay there for a long time, letting the silence of the early morning sink into her chest. Something was changing, not outside her, but within. She had thought being an anchor meant holding others steady, keeping Morty safe, softening Beth's edges, tempering Rick's storms. But now she was beginning to understand the deeper truth that unless she could hold her own ground, her steadiness for others would collapse. The lesson lingered in her like an unspoken vow. Later that day, when Morty confessed in a quiet, trembling voice that he was afraid of what he was becoming, of how Rick's adventures were shaping him, Summer didn't rush to reassure him. Instead, she met his eyes and said gently, "You don't have to run from it. You just have to remember who you are inside it." The words surprised her, but they felt right, as though they had come from somewhere beyond her. Morty didn't respond immediately, but she saw something flicker in his face, a moment of recognition that eased the weight he carried. That evening, Rick passed by her in the hallway, carrying some contraption that hummed faintly with dangerous energy. For the briefest moment he paused and, without looking at her, muttered, "Don't let anyone take that from you." He didn't explain what he meant. He didn't need to. Summer understood that he saw more than he would ever admit, and that even Rick, in his fractured way, recognized what she was becoming. The house returned to its restless rhythm, but for Summer everything felt quieter inside. She was no longer only reacting to the chaos around her. She was learning, slowly, to root herself, to carry the calm she needed, so that when the storms came, as they always did, she would not be swept away. The quiet she had learned to carry within her was tested sooner than she expected. The days following Rick's cryptic remark began with small disturbances, things she might once have overlooked. A light flickering in the garage when no one was inside, a faint tremor in the walls that seemed too deliberate to be a trick of the plumbing, and moments when she felt eyes on her, though she was alone. Summer told herself it was nothing, the house simply bending beneath the weight of Rick's endless experiments. Yet a seed of unease settled deep within her, one she couldn't quite shake. It was during dinner one night when the unease turned tangible. Rick arrived late, his usual manic energy strangely subdued, his eyes darker than usual. He barely touched his food, instead fiddling with the worn flask that never left his side. Morty tried to fill the silence with half-hearted stories about school, but his words faltered when Rick's hand tightened so hard around the flask it groaned as if about to break. Summer saw it, saw the restraint, the barely contained storm, and for the first time she wondered if even Rick's genius wasn't enough to shield them from whatever loomed just beyond their sight. That night, Summer dreamt again. She stood on a plane of glass that stretched into infinity, her reflection staring back from every direction. Each mirrored version of herself wore a different expression: fear, anger, doubt, indifference, fragments of her own heart fractured and spread across the endless surface. She moved carefully, each step echoing like thunder, until one reflection leaned forward and whispered through the glass, "You are not enough." The words vibrated in her chest, heavy, suffocating. She almost believed them. But then she remembered Morty's trembling voice, Rick's fleeting acknowledgement, her own vow, whispered in silence. She knelt and pressed her palm against the glass. "I am enough," she said softly. And as the words left her lips, the reflection shattered into dust. She woke gasping, the room dim with early dawn, and felt the shift inside her again. It was not certainty, not yet, but the beginnings of a resolve that went deeper than instinct. She was beginning to see that the anchor was not a gift passively carried. It was something forged, tested in the moments when the world pressed hardest against her. When morning came, she found Morty, sitting alone outside, his face pale beneath the weak sunlight. He didn't speak until she sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "I had a dream too," he said finally, voice shaking. He described shadows moving through endless corridors, whispering his name, promising him power if only he surrendered. Summer didn't flinch. She listened, and when he was finished, she told him the truth, that fear was the cost of being awake in a world like theirs, but surrendering to it was a choice he didn't have to make. Morty looked at her then, as though she was older than she had any right to be, and nodded slowly. Later that day, Rick appeared in the garage doorway, his hands stained with oil, his face drawn tight. "Something's coming," he said, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance. "I can feel it. The walls between worlds are thinning." Summer didn't answer immediately. She thought of the flickering lights, the tremors, Morty's dream, her own visions of fractured mirrors. She knew Rick wasn't exaggerating. She knew it was true. And though the weight of it pressed down on her, she also felt something else, rising within, the quiet, unyielding calm she had carried into her dreams. For the first time, she wondered if the storms to come were not only tests for Rick, not only burdens for Morty, but something meant for her as well. The house seemed smaller that evening, as though its walls strained against what approached. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, voices in the distance carried too far, and every silence held a question. Summer sat at her desk, staring at her reflection in the window's glass. She did not look away. She was not the same girl who had once drifted through her family's chaos unnoticed. Something was shaping her, sharpening her, preparing her. And though fear stirred in her chest, she steadied her breath. She would hold. She had to. The evening passed with the weight of silence pressing on every corner of the house, as though the structure itself knew what Rick had confessed. Summer lay awake, listening to the faint hum of machines in the garage, each whir and spark carrying the echo of preparation. She pictured Rick hunched over his workbench, eyes shadowed, hands moving faster than thought, as if he could outrun what was coming by sheer will and circuitry. Morty had fallen asleep earlier, but even in slumber he twitched and murmured, his fists clenching against phantoms only he could see. Summer did not close her eyes. Something within her told her the world outside those thin walls was already shifting, and if she let herself drift too long, she might wake to find everything unrecognizable. At dawn, she descended quietly into the garage, finding Rick exactly as she imagined, slumped against a chair, eyes bloodshot, surrounded by scraps of metal and glowing fragments of devices too alien to name. He looked up at her, bleary but sharp, and for the briefest moment he didn't treat her like a child. You feel it too, don't you? He muttered. Summer only nodded. She didn't need to explain. The trembling in her chest, the dreams that carried more weight than illusions, the air so thick it felt like a storm waiting to break. Rick gave a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, thought so. This family's cursed with knowing too much. The words lingered as Summer helped him clean the bench. She had never been invited into this part of his world before, never been allowed so close to the fragments of his genius, but now he didn't push her away. If anything, he looked almost relieved to share the burden. He began muttering calculations, under his breath, not to her, but not entirely to himself either, and though she couldn't follow the logic, she could sense its urgency. He wasn't just building a machine, he was trying to brace reality itself. By midday, Morty stumbled into the garage, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His voice cracked with hesitation. "Rick, I dreamt again, but this time it wasn't shadows. It was voices. They kept saying your name over and over." Rick stiffened, tools slipping from his hand, and though he tried to mask it with a scoff, Summer caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Dreams are just noise, Morty," he said quickly, too quickly. "Ignore them." But Summer knew better. The thinness between worlds was bleeding into their nights, stitching their subconscious to something greater, something that wanted to be heard. Later, while Rick locked himself deeper into his work, Summer and Morty sat by the window. The street outside looked ordinary. Children on bikes, a mail truck rattling past, the sky clear and blue. But the ordinary was a mask, one she no longer trusted. "Do you think he's scared?" Morty asked suddenly, his voice low. Summer thought of Rick's trembling hands, the hollow in his laughter, the way he refused to meet their eyes when they pressed too close to the truth. "Yes," she said, because lying now felt pointless. Morty swallowed hard, as though the admission solidified something he wasn't ready to accept. That night, Summer's dreams changed. She no longer walked across glass, no longer saw only herself, fractured into 1,000 forms. Instead, she stood on the edge of a vast abyss. Across the void, she saw Morty, reaching toward her with desperation, his form flickering as though he were half present, half vanishing into nothing. Behind him loomed a shape so immense it could not be contained, its form shifting like smoke and storm, its voice rumbling with every thought she had ever doubted. "You will break," it whispered, the words vibrating through her bones. For a moment, she almost believed it. But then she stepped forward, and though the abyss yawned wide, she refused to retreat. She extended her hand toward Morty, and when their fingers brushed, a surge of light tore through the void, silencing the voice. She awoke with her heart pounding, but also with clarity she hadn't felt before. Whatever was coming was not only Rick's fight. It was not only Morty's burden. It was hers, too. The house could no longer hold the illusion of safety, and the family could no longer pretend to orbit Rick's shadow without consequence. The walls were thinning, the storm was near, and when it broke, they would either stand together or be scattered beyond recognition. Summer rose from bed, her reflection catching in the mirror. For the first time, she did not see hesitation in her own eyes. She saw defiance. She saw the beginnings of someone who would not shatter, no matter how loud the void whispered. Morning crept into the house like a shadow, slow and uneasy, its light doing little to drive away the heaviness that had settled over them. Summer's clarity from the night before clung to her like armor, but the silence pressing around her reminded her that clarity alone was not enough. Downstairs, she could already hear Rick muttering in the garage, his voice sharp, clipped, as if arguing with himself, or with something no one else could hear. Morty sat at the kitchen table, untouched cereal growing soggy in front of him, his eyes distant. When Summer entered, he didn't look up. He didn't need to. She could feel the echo of his dreams pulling at him, the same way hers still pulsed, at the edges of her thoughts. She sat across from him and, for a moment, they didn't speak. The silence was heavier than words, filled with everything unspoken, fear, questions, the knowledge that their lives had already crossed a threshold they could never return from. Finally, Morty lifted his gaze, his voice trembling with both exhaustion and urgency. "Summer?" The voices are louder now. They weren't just calling Rick's name this time. They knew mine too, like they were waiting for me. The confession settled like a weight between them, but Summer did not recoil. Instead, she leaned forward, her tone steady. "Then we don't let them decide what we are. We don't let them take you or me. We stand with Rick, even if he's too scared to admit he needs us." Morty blinked at her, startled not by her words, but by the conviction in her voice. For once, he didn't argue. He only nodded. The day unfolded with a strange rhythm, the house alive with the sounds of Rick's frantic work. Sparks hissed, engines roared, and alien hums rippled through the garage as though he were weaving threads of entire dimensions together by sheer force of will. At one point, Summer slipped inside and found him surrounded by glowing blue orbs, their light pulsing like beating heart. He didn't notice her at first, his hands trembling as he locked a sequence of runes into place. When she finally asked what it was, he shot her a glance that was equal parts weary and raw. "Insurance," he said before turning back. "Not for me. For you. For Morty. For the pieces of this family that still matter." Summer didn't press further, but the words lingered. Rick, in his own broken way, was preparing for sacrifice. He had always been willing to throw himself into chaos, but this time it wasn't reckless. This time it was deliberate. She saw it in the set of his shoulders, in the way he refused to meet her eyes. He was building something final. That night, when the house should have been still, the storm broke its first whisper into reality. The air outside grew heavy, the sky thick with an unnatural glow that twisted the colors of twilight into something wrong, like a painting smeared too far across its canvas. Morty was the first to feel it, jerking awake from another dream, his voice choked with panic. "It's here, Summer. It's not just in our heads anymore." She rushed to the window, and what she saw froze her blood. The horizon pulsed with light, not lightning, but something slower, deliberate, as though reality itself were cracking open seam by seam. The houses on the street still stood, the mailboxes still lined the sidewalks, but behind them shimmered distortions like the edges of another world bleeding into theirs. For the first time, the ordinary mask faltered. The truth of what Rick had feared was taking form. Rick burst into their rooms moments later, his hair disheveled, his hands coated with oil and ash. "We're out of time," he said, his voice cutting through their shock. He didn't bother with comfort, didn't bother with explanations. He simply gestured for them to follow, his urgency stripping away any chance for hesitation. The storm outside roared louder, the walls of the house trembling as if they too sensed their reality was being pulled apart. As they descended into the garage, Morty clutched at Summer's arm, his voice small but certain. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Summer tightened her grip on him, forcing strength into her words. We will, because we have to. It was not a promise of safety. It was a refusal to surrender. Rick slammed a final switch, and the machines he had built flared to life, filling the garage with blinding light. Strange patterns rippled across the floor, climbing the walls, wrapping the room in energy that hummed, with both danger and salvation. "Once we step through, there's no going back," Rick muttered, his tone heavy with the weight of truth. For a heartbeat, the three of them stood together, their shadows tangled in the glow, bound by fear, by defiance, by blood. The storm outside cracked open wider, spilling its chaos into their world. And as Rick reached for the control that would tear them from their home and hurl them into the unknown, Summer realized that whatever lay ahead would not just test Rick's genius or Morty's courage. It would test her resolve, her very soul. The abyss had spoken, and now it had come to claim them. The air inside the garage thickened as the machine screamed to life, drowning out the roar of the storm outside. Sparks leapt across coils, energy, arcs snapped against steel, and the floor trembled as if the house itself was resisting what Rick had built. Summer's pulse hammered in her ears, her chest tight as the glow around them intensified. Morty clung to her sleeve, his wide eyes reflecting the shifting patterns that rippled through the room like the veins of some living organism. Rick stood at the center of it all, hunched over his console, his hands steady despite the chaos, as if he had done this 1,000 times before in places no one else could imagine. "Don't let go," Rick muttered without looking back, his voice strained, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Whatever happens on the other side, don't you dare let go of each other. You separate, you're gone." The garage door rattled violently as the storm pressed against it, flashes of distorted light seeping through the cracks. For a heartbeat, Summer thought the entire structure would rip free and scatter into the night. Then, with a deafening snap, the machine reached its crescendo. A rift tore open before them, its edges jagged, pulsating with raw energy that bent the air and pulled at their bodies like an unseen tide. The smell of ozone filled their lungs, sharp and metallic, laced with something older, something alien. Rick didn't hesitate. He threw his coat tighter around him and stepped into the light. Summer's instinct screamed to grab Morty and run, but the storm outside made that impossible. This was their only path, and hesitation meant death. With a steadying breath, she pulled Morty forward. The three of them plunged into the rift. The transition was not like falling or flying. It was like being unraveled thread by thread and rewoven into another place, another shape. Every thought, every fear stretched thin until it threatened to snap. Summer felt Morty's hand crushing hers, his panic bleeding into her own, grounding her even as the fabric of reality folded around them. She caught glimpses as they moved, fragmented visions of alien landscapes, twisted cities built on impossible geometry, oceans suspended in the air like mirrors, faces staring back that weren't human and weren't alive. When it ended, they collapsed onto hard ground. The air was heavy, thicker than Earth's, filled with the low hum of energy that seemed to seep from the world itself. Summer staggered upright, pulling Morty with her, her breath ragged. Rick was already standing, his eyes darting across the alien horizon with the quick, assessing sharpness of a man who had seen it all before. But even he looked unsettled. The sky above them swirled in unnatural hues, violet, deep crimson, streaks of green that bled into one another as if the heavens were alive and watching. Towers of stone and metal rose in the distance, carved with symbols that glowed faintly, pulsing like heartbeats. And far beyond, at the horizon, where the land seemed to bend upward into infinity, something vast shifted, too large to see clearly, but its movement made the air tremble. Morty whimpered, his voice breaking.
Where are we, Rick? What is this place? Rick adjusted the strap of the device on his back, his tone grim. Not a place you'll find on any map, Morty. This is the bleed, the skin between universes, not supposed to exist like this, not solid. But something's feeding it, holding it open. That storm back home? Just the first crack. This, he swept a hand toward the horizon, is the wound. Summer's stomach tightened.
She could feel it, too. The sense that this place wasn't merely a landscape, but a living scar, raw and waiting. And though she didn't want to admit it, part of her knew this was where the voices had come from, where the pull in her dreams had been leading them. They began to walk, the ground beneath their feet shifting like it couldn't decide whether it was stone, sand, or something alive. Every step echoed strangely, carrying farther than it should, as if unseen ears were listening. Summer kept close to Morty, but her eyes never left Rick. She watched the way his jaw clenched tighter with each passing moment, how his shoulders hunched as though bracing against something only he could sense. After what felt like hours, or maybe only minutes, time seemed fragile here. They came upon the first structure. It was a ruin, half buried in the shifting ground, its walls etched with the same glowing symbols that lined the horizon. As they drew near, the symbols flared brighter, reacting to their presence. Rick stopped abruptly, his face pale, his voice barely above a whisper. "It knows we're here." Before they could question him, the air around the ruin trembled. A sound, low and resonant, rolled through the air. Not mechanical, not natural, but a voice, vast and layered, speaking in tones that pressed directly against the mind. Summer froze, her breath catching as the words slipped into her skull, bypassing her ears entirely. "You return." Fragments of him. Carriers of the breach. Morty clutched his head, shaking, his voice breaking into sobs. "Make it stop, Summer."
I can't. She pulled him close, forcing her voice steady, even as the presence coiled through her own mind like smoke. "You're not taking him. Do you hear me? You're not taking him." Rick stepped forward, his own voice a growl, his fury cutting through the oppressive weight. "You don't get to talk about fragments. You don't get to call the shots here. If you wanted me, you should have stayed in the dark where I left you."
The ruin pulsed violently at his words, the glow surging until it painted the landscape in blinding light. The voice thundered again, shaking the ground beneath them. "Then you will see what we are without shadows." And with that the ruin split, open, unleashing a storm of light and form, shapes that should not exist tearing free from the stone. Summer's grip on Morty tightened as she realized the truth. They had not crossed into another world. They had crossed into the heart of something that had been waiting for them all along. The storm of light and shape surged forward, rolling across the ground like liquid fire, and Summer felt its pull in her chest as if the abyss itself were clawing
at her resolve. Morty stumbled against her, his small body trembling, and she wrapped her arms around him, forcing calm into her voice, even as the world twisted violently around them. "Stay close. Do not let go. We move together." The words
sounded strange in her own ears, but they carried weight, carrying not just hope, but intention, a tether in the chaos. Rick stepped forward, his device humming against his back, wires snaking out like veins of electricity. "They're not real," he barked over the noise, though Summer could see the tremor in his hands, the tight set of his jaw. They're not real. They're constructs, projections. Whatever this place wants, it wants to see if we break. But even as he spoke, a form, tall, angular, shifting with impossible angles, slid through the light, its presence pressing down like gravity. Morty gasped, clutching Summer's arm. "Rick, it's moving!" Summer's eyes met Rick's for a brief second, and in that glance she saw the same recognition that had followed her for days. This was not a place where panic could dictate action. They had survived before in ways no one else could understand. They would survive again, but only together. She planted her feet firmly on the ground, inhaled, and spoke, not to them, not to the storm, but to herself and Morty. "We stand, no matter what comes." The shapes advanced, their forms twisting in ways that defied thought, each movement a distortion of reality itself. They were more than shadows, more than projections. They carried an intelligence, a hunger for recognition. And the longer Summer stared at them, the more she understood that this was the test Rick had been preparing for. Morty flinched as a tendril of light brushed against him, and Summer reached for him, pulling him behind her as she whispered, "You
are not alone. We are here. We are together."
Her words seemed to anchor something, the storm wobbling slightly in response to her certainty. Rick's voice cut through the chaos, precise and commanding. "Use the device, now!" The contraption on his back unfurled, glowing with concentrated energy, and he aimed it toward the advancing shapes. Beams of pulsating light shot forth, striking the forms, and for a brief moment they recoiled, twisting in dissonance before reforming, more fluid and jagged than before. Summer realized then that brute force alone would not stop them. They were testing will, determination, the strength to hold on to oneself and one another. She reached out, guiding Morty's trembling hand toward the controls Rick indicated. "Together," she said. "We do this together." Hesitant, unsure, Morty's fingers found the lever, and Summer helped him steady the pulse. A synchronized beam of energy flared outward, striking the largest of the forms. It shuddered, its form splitting into fragments of light that fell to the ground, dissolving slowly like mist. The others paused, recoiling, and for a fleeting moment the chaos seemed suspended. Rick's voice softened just enough for them to hear over the hum. "Good. Keep it up. Don't let them find a crack in your focus. Don't let them see fear." Summer's jaw tightened. Fear was already there, but she did not acknowledge it. Not now. She had held herself together in the dreams, in the strange premonitions, and she would hold now, for Morty, for Rick, and for the fragile hope that bound them together. The shapes surged again, faster this time, their forms coalescing into something more substantial, more aware. Summer felt the weight in her chest intensify, a pressure that threatened to topple her resolve, but as the tendrils of light brushed against her, she found clarity. She spoke aloud, projecting strength into every word. "We are here. We do
not break. You will not take us." The statement rippled outward, tangibly, as if the storm itself responded to her declaration. Morty's hands steadied on the device.
Rick's flares of energy struck in rhythm with Summer's voice, forming a fragile harmony against the chaos. The shapes screamed, not with sound but with a force that twisted the air and rattled the ground, and then, slowly, began to pull back, their forms unspooling, retreating toward the rift from which they had emerged. Summer and Morty stood panting, gripping each other, sweat and ash coating their skin. Rick approached, his eyes softer now, a rare flicker of approval crossing his face. "You did it," he muttered, almost to himself. You held it together. That's all that matters. Summer exhaled, feeling the tension in her body dissolve just enough to let exhaustion seep in. The storm beyond the horizon had not vanished, but its immediate assault had been deflected, held at bay by something more powerful than technology or fire, resolve, unity, and the unyielding weight of human will. Summer looked at Morty, his wide eyes reflecting relief, terror, and something new. Pride. She reached out, holding his face gently. We're okay, she said softly. For now. We survived. Morty nodded, and for the first time since stepping into this strange, bleeding world, they allowed themselves to believe they might survive. Again, the air began to settle, though the strange hum of the world around them persisted. Summer knew this was not the end. Nothing here would ever allow that, but for the first time she also understood something fundamental. Fear could reach them, chaos could press them to the brink, and yet together they could hold their ground. That quiet strength, the anchor she had been cultivating, was real, and it was enough to face the unknown. The remnants of the shapes dissolved into the air, leaving the world around them still and silent, though the hum of this strange dimension never truly faded. Summer and Morty remained rooted where they had fought, their bodies trembling from exhaustion, their minds still stretching to process what had just occurred. Rick moved among the fragments of light and shadow, examining the residue of the entities, with meticulous care, muttering under his breath in a language that seemed older than the universe itself. Summer watched him, realizing that even in victory he was far from calm. The fight had ended, but understanding this place was only beginning. Morty finally broke the silence. Rick, what was that? What are we even standing on? Rick's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the horizon where the air shimmered with unreality. This, he said slowly, gesturing to the uneven ground and twisting horizon, is what happens when universes leak. The laws of reality here aren't
rules, they're suggestions. And some things, like those shapes, exist only to test the living, to measure their focus, their will. It's a checkpoint, a warning. And honestly, he trailed off, the weight in his voice betraying his usual flippancy. It's dangerous as hell. Summer took a tentative step forward, feeling the terrain shift slightly under her weight, like walking on the surface of water, solidified just enough to hold her. She reached for Morty, who followed her, still glancing nervously at the remnants of light swirling in the distance. Then we keep moving, she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. We have to see what's beyond. The rift led us here for a reason. Morty nodded, drawing strength from her certainty, though his fingers still trembled around hers. Rick followed, adjusting his device so that the glow from its coils pulsed in rhythm with his footsteps. Moving forward is fine, but pay attention. This world, he waved a hand, encompassing everything around them, doesn't forgive mistakes. Nothing here is what it seems, and almost everything you see is trying to make you see something else entirely. Summer absorbed his words with quiet gravity, understanding that the landscape itself was a kind of mirror, a reflection of perception as much as reality. As they ventured deeper, the terrain began to shift more dramatically. Hills of crystalline shards rose in impossible angles, casting fractured rainbows across the ground that seemed to pulse with a rhythm synchronized to their heartbeat. Pools of reflective liquid collected in depressions, and when Summer peered into one, she glimpsed visions not of herself, but of moments that might have been. Paths she had not taken, choices she had almost made, versions of Morty and Rick that existed only in possibility.
She blinked, turning away. This place was not merely alien, it was intimate, personal, as if it had reached inside them before they even arrived. Morty shivered and whispered, "It's showing us things. Things. We might not even remember." Summer nodded, gripping his hand. "It's part of the test, the shapes, the visions. They're all trying to see if we can remain ourselves, if we can hold on." Rick's attention was drawn to a series of arches that appeared in the distance, constructed from the same crystalline matter as the hills. Symbols glimmered faintly, along the surfaces more complex than any alphabet they had seen, and yet somehow intelligible, as if resonating with memory rather than understanding.
"Those arches," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "They're markers. They lead somewhere, or to something. Probably both. And trust me, the something part isn't casual." As they approached the arches, the temperature shifted. It was subtle.
But the air grew heavier, almost tactile, pressing against their skin like invisible hands. Summer felt Morty's grip tighten around hers, his small body trying to anchor itself to hers against the weight of this world. She whispered softly, "We're together, we're safe together." Her words carried a warmth that cut through the alien chill, a quiet defiance against the environment's subtle intimidation. Passing under the first arch, Summer noticed the symbols reacted, glowing brighter, pulsing gently, almost like breathing. Each step felt like a negotiation, each breath an assertion of presence. Morty's steps faltered, and Summer bent down to steady him. "One step at a time," she said, her tone soft, her eyes reflecting the pulsing light. "We'll take it. Together, always together." Rick glanced at them briefly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, fleeting but real. "Good. Keep that focus. This world respects it in its own unique way. Lose it for a moment, and it will exploit you." His voice had a rare
note of pride, the kind that came not from condescension but from recognition.
Summer felt her resolve solidify further, the bond between them, the unspoken commitment to hold each other steady, becoming their anchor amidst the alien currents. By the time they emerged from the last arch, the landscape beyond unfolded into a vast plateau. Strange, angular spires rose like fingers toward a sky that rippled in colors beyond comprehension. The air thrummed with a low, resonant vibration that seemed to match their own heartbeats, syncing them to the rhythm of the world. Summer took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of this place echoing within her chest. They had survived the first confrontation, and now the true exploration of the unknown began. The plateau stretched before them like a frozen moment in time, jagged spires reaching skyward as if they were the bones of a long-forgotten giant. The air vibrated with a low hum, almost melodic, though every note carried a tension that made Summer's skin prickle. Morty clung close, whispering questions in half-formed words, his small frame shivering under the weight of this world's quiet, unrelenting scrutiny. Summer's hand tightened around his, grounding both of them as Rick moved ahead, eyes scanning the horizon with a precision that suggested familiarity, though none of them had ever set foot here before. They walked slowly, each step a negotiation, with the ground that flexed subtly under their weight, threatening imbalance. Summer noticed how the light fractured in unexpected ways along the spires, projecting fragmented reflections that formed fleeting images of other worlds, other possibilities, and perhaps other lives they had never lived.
"It's showing us," Morty murmured, voice barely audible. "What could have been?" "Not just that," Summer said, her voice firm, even as her heart raced. "It's showing us what it wants us to see. We have to remember that. These glimpses. They're tests, distractions. Keep your focus. Morty nodded, swallowing his fear, his gaze flicking nervously from the fractured light to the plateau's edge. Rick stopped suddenly, crouching near a cluster of spires that glimmered.
With a deeper, almost liquid glow, he traced his fingers along their crystalline surfaces, murmuring calculations and observations that sounded more like prayer than science. "These aren't natural," he said finally, standing straight. "This plateau, these formations, it's architecture, deliberate. Someone or something shaped it to guide, to observe, to manipulate. And these beings we encountered before, they're only the first line. This whole place is alive in a sense, but alive in its own terms. And it watches." Summer swallowed, trying to keep her anxiety in check. "So the shapes weren't random," she said quietly. "They were guardians?" Rick's gaze darkened. "Guardians, messengers, probes, whatever you call them, they're designed to measure our reactions, to test our focus and resolve. And it's not done. We're far from done." His words left a chill in the air, heavier than the vibrating pulse of the plateau. They pressed on, moving through the irregular terrain as Rick occasionally paused to mark points, touch the glowing symbols etched along the spires, and adjust his device, which hummed more insistently now, resonating with the pulse of this place. Summer noticed that as they moved, the landscape subtly shifted, guiding them along paths that were not always visible, almost as if the plateau itself were curving them toward a destination. She wondered if the world beneath them understood their fears, their determination, their bond, and whether it respected them for surviving the first assault. Morty stumbled over a jagged stone, catching himself on a reflective pool of liquid that shimmered with impossible colors. When he looked down, he froze. His reflection didn't mimic his movements fully. Instead, it hesitated, lagged, then moved independently, showing a version of him older, hardened, shaped by experiences he hadn't yet lived. He recoiled, a tremor running through his body. "Summer, it's showing me... me?" Summer knelt beside him, her hand brushing his cheek, steadying him. "It's showing possibilities," she said, voice soft but firm. "Not all of them will happen. Not all of them matter. What matters is us, right here, right now. Hold on to that. Hold on to each other." Morty nodded, swallowing hard, and together they continued, their small team moving in cautious synchronicity across the alien plateau. Hours, or what might have been hours, time was slippery here, passed, and the horizon began to change. The spires grew taller, more intricate, spiraling into impossible angles, their glowing symbols now forming patterns that suggested deliberate communication. Rick stopped at the largest spire yet, staring at it with intensity. "This," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "this is the origin point, the center of whatever's shaping this reality. The beings, the tests, it all emanates from here." Summer felt a weight in her chest, a combination of fear and awe. They had survived the first line of defense, navigated the trials of perception and will, and now they were on the threshold of understanding the source, the place where the rules of this realm had been written, and perhaps where they could confront the true purpose of the entities. Morty shivered beside her. What if it doesn't want to talk? What if it doesn't care about us at all? Summer tightened her grip on his hand. "Then we make it care. We survive. Together. We always survive together." Rick turned his device toward the spire, adjusting its coils until it pulsed in harmony with the symbols etched into the crystal. "Whatever's at the center," he said grimly, "it's alive. But alive doesn't mean invincible, and that That's our advantage." He glanced at them both, a rare flicker of reassurance crossing his otherwise stern expression. "But pay attention. The next step, it won't be just a test of strength, it'll be a test of everything you are." Summer inhaled, feeling the pulse of the world beneath their feet, the hum in the air vibrating through her bones. Morty's hand squeezed hers, and in that instant she understood that however alien, however dangerous this place, their unity, quiet, stubborn, human, was their anchor. Whatever awaited them at the origin, they would face it together. The plateau seemed to breathe around them, subtle rises and falls in the terrain that mimicked the inhalation of some colossal, unseen creature. Summer felt it in her chest, a rhythmic pulse that thrummed in tandem with the low hum of the spires. Morty stayed close, whispering questions that never fully left his lips, his fear tempered by the quiet steadiness of Summer's presence. Rick, ahead of them, moved with deliberate care, as though each step had been calculated 1,000 times over in a dimension only he could imagine. They approached a cluster of crystalline formations, smaller than the spires but intricate, carved with patterns that seemed almost alive. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing in subtle waves, and Summer could feel their resonance against her skin. She reached out, hand trembling slightly, and touched one of the formations. Instantly, images flickered across her mind, brief, disjointed, visions of lives she had never lived, moments she had never experienced, yet strangely familiar. Morty gasped beside her, pulling her sleeve. "Summer, it's talking to us, isn't it?" Rick's voice was low, careful, as he crouched beside them, adjusting his device. "Not talking exactly, communicating, but it's subtle. We have to pay attention to patterns, reactions, rhythms. This place responds to intent more than words." He gestured to the spire ahead, which now pulsed more intensely, symbols rotating in a silent, deliberate dance. "It's trying to guide us, not force, not threaten, guide, but you'll have to interpret its rhythm, its cues. Miss one, and the next step could be lethal." Summer swallowed, feeling a mix of awe and apprehension. The visions continued, brushing against her consciousness like the lightest touch, brief glimpses of paths they might take, choices they might make, and consequences that felt both immediate
and infinite. Morty clutched her hand tightly, grounding them both. I don't understand it," he whispered, voice quivering. "How do we even know what it wants?" She drew a slow breath, centering herself.
"We don't know, but we do know each other. That's enough to start. We move together, we respond together. Whatever it wants, it's not going to find us divided." Her voice had a firmness that even she felt reverberate within her chest, and Morty nodded, drawing courage from her certainty. Rick stood, stepping closer to the largest spire in the cluster. "This is the first real clue," he said. "The formations aren't random, the pulses, the symbols, the rhythm. It's constructing a sequence. Think of it like a puzzle, but one you live in. And the solution isn't cleverness or speed, it's coherence, unity, staying aligned with your own intent while interpreting the world's intent." He glanced at them both, eyes serious. "If you lose that alignment, you don't just fail, you vanish." Summer felt the weight of that statement settle on her shoulders. She looked around at the plateau, the spires, the pools reflecting, fractured skies, and realized that every element of this world was deliberate. Every color, every shimmer, every pulse of light was part of a pattern she had to read. She could feel it in her mind, a quiet resonance echoing against the visions. There was intelligence here, intent behind the chaos. It was patient, almost benevolent, but it demanded precision, awareness, and trust. They moved forward, guided by subtle changes in the pulse of the spires. Every step required attention, every breath measured against the vibrations that surrounded them. Summer noticed that as they progressed, the formations began to respond more actively, glowing brighter where they hesitated, dimming when they aligned correctly. Morty stumbled a few times, his fear flaring, but Summer's hand and steady voice drew him back into focus. Hours, or perhaps minutes, for time had lost meaning, passed, and the formations began to coalesce into a subtle pathway leading toward a distant structure that seemed older, larger, and more intricate than anything they had seen. Its presence carried gravity, not in mass, but in intention, a draw that compelled them forward while whispering warnings into the deepest corners of their minds. Rick's tone was measured but urgent. That's the origin point we need to study. Next. The structures, the symbols, they're all emanating from there. If we can understand it even a little, we might understand the entities shaping this world. And if we understand them, we can start controlling the rules, just enough to survive. Summer looked at Morty, seeing the fear still lingering in his eyes, but also a flicker of understanding, a spark of trust that she clung to. She squeezed his hand gently. We've made it this far. Together, we keep moving. Step by step, vision by vision, we'll figure it out. Morty nodded, drawing courage from her certainty. As they approached the first hints of the origin, the air thickened, the pulse of the plateau growing stronger, more insistent. Summer realized that every choice, every alignment, every moment of unity was being observed, evaluated. And yet, despite the pressure, she felt an unexpected calm settle over her. They were here, they were together, and for all the danger that lay ahead, that bond, the quiet strength of connection, was their anchor. The structure ahead loomed larger now, rising from the plateau like a monument that had existed long before memory itself. Its surface shimmered with 1,000 overlapping patterns, symbols that pulsed and twisted as if alive, communicating in a language that was felt more than heard. Summer noticed a subtle change in the vibrations around them, the low hum that had accompanied them since the plateau now formed harmonics, almost like a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of her own pulse. Morty shivered beside her, clutching her arm, and she squeezed his hand, grounding them both. Rick stepped forward cautiously, his device thrumming in response to the structure's resonance. "This is it," he said softly. "Whatever's controlling
This world. It's here. And this is the first real interface. Up close, you'll see. It isn't just a structure, it's a consciousness."
Summer tilted her head, trying to comprehend what that meant. A structure with awareness, an intelligence that could observe, interpret, and perhaps influence them. It was almost too much to grasp, yet she could feel its presence pressing gently against her mind, inviting her attention. The closer they approached, the more intricate the symbols became, folding into each other in impossible ways, like a fractal frozen mid-motion. Summer reached out instinctively, brushing a finger against one of the glowing surfaces. A wave of images washed over her, glimpses of universes bending, moments of possibility colliding, echoes of beings and places she had never seen. It was overwhelming, but amidst the flood of sensation, a quiet thread emerged, a sense of purpose, as if the structure itself were asking, waiting, testing the patience of those who dared reach it. Morty flinched, stepping back.
I don't know if I can... His voice faltered, fear and wonder mixed in a trembling breath. Summer placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you can. Look at me. Breathe. We do this together, step by step. Her reassurance seemed to anchor him. He nodded, eyes wide, but steadying.
The thread of connection between them pulsed as strongly as the structure's own rhythm. Rick adjusted his device, and the humming intensified, syncing with the vibrations of the cymbals. "It's not hostile," he said, though his voice carried caution. "Not yet, but it's evaluating. Every step, every thought, every hesitation, it's aware. It wants to know if we can align ourselves with it, if we can participate without being destroyed. And it will push boundaries, it will test intent." Summer absorbed his words, feeling the responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was not a battle of strength or speed, it was a negotiation of consciousness. As they moved closer, the symbols shifted, forming patterns that seemed almost like questions. Summer instinctively mirrored the motions, moving her hands in alignment with the pulses. A warmth spread through her, and she realized that the structure responded to harmony, to coherence between observer and environment. Morty imitated her, movements hesitantly, and the structure's resonance deepened, humming in approval. Rick's device pulsed in response, amplifying the connection. A voice, or rather, a presence, echoed within her mind, not in words but in feeling. "Who are you?"
Why do you come? What do you seek? Summer felt the weight of each query, each pulse pressing against her consciousness. She closed her eyes, answering not with language, but with intent, sending clarity and unity through the thread of their connection.
"We come together, we seek understanding, we survive, and we protect each other." Morty's own presence joined hers in the communion, a trembling wave of fear and trust that the structure seemed to recognize. The vibration shifted again, forming a pattern of approval, subtle but undeniable. Summer exhaled, feeling the tension in her chest ease slightly. The structure's consciousness was vast, patient, and inscrutable, but it responded to the honesty of their intent. Rick stepped forward cautiously, placing his device against the surface. Beams of calibrated energy traced along the symbols, illuminating new layers beneath the original pattern. "It's responding to interpretation," he said, voice tight with focus. "The symbols aren't just passive, they're adaptive. The structure tests perception, alignment, and coherence. Misstep, hesitation, or dishonesty, and it could fold reality around you." Summer felt a shiver run down her spine, but stood firm, anchoring Morty beside her. Hours passed as they moved in delicate harmony, reading patterns, following rhythms, responding with intent, and, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the structure began to yield. Pathways opened where none had existed, revealing chambers within, each glowing with a deeper, more complex resonance. Summer sensed layers of intelligence nested one within another, like the consciousness had depth and patience beyond.
Human comprehension.
Morty whispered, awed. It's letting us in." Summer squeezed his hand gently. "We've earned the first step. That's all it asks for now. Focus, clarity, trust, and togetherness. That's enough." Rick gave a rare, approving
Nod. First step only. The journey's far from over. But yes, it's letting us proceed. And now we learn more about what shapes this place and why.
Summer inhaled, feeling the pulse of the structure beneath her fingers and in her chest, and realized that whatever this consciousness was, they had formed a fragile, tentative bridge. A connection based not on dominance or fear, but on intent, alignment, and unity. The entities shaping this realm were not monsters, They were observers, patient and vast, and their tests were woven into the very fabric of the world. Summer exhaled slowly, drawing Morty close. "We're ready," we step.
Forward together, we face what comes. Morty nodded, courage building in his small frame.
Rick adjusted his device one last time, eyes scanning every pulse and symbol, and together they crossed the threshold into the inner chamber, where the first tangible communication with the consciousness awaited them, waiting to reveal motives and intentions more subtle and more complex than anything they had imagined. The chamber inside the spire stretched impossibly upward, walls shimmering with the same fractal patterns that had guided them here, but more intricate, more alive. Light pulsed from within the crystal, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to move independently of their bodies. Summer and Morty stepped cautiously, feeling the hum of consciousness pressing gently against their minds, like a patient hand testing the waters of understanding. Rick's device thrummed in harmony with the vibrations, almost singing in response to the patterns. A subtle shift in the light made Summer pause. Shapes formed and dissolved on the walls, geometric puzzles that twisted and reconfigured themselves, as if aware of their gaze. Morty's fingers grazed her arm. It's asking something," he whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know what, though." Summer tilted her head, studying the flowing symbols.
"It's not just asking," she said softly. "It's challenging us to understand, to respond, to align ourselves with it." Rick stepped closer to a segment of wall, holding his device out, the coils emitting faint blue sparks. "Exactly."
These puzzles aren't arbitrary, they're a dialogue, not words, not language, but a negotiation of perception and intent. You misread it, hesitate, or act out of fear, and it will test again, harder. He glanced at them both, eyes sharp. Your focus and unity are your lifeline. Summer nodded, feeling a pressure of awareness settle over her. The chamber seemed to measure not just their actions, but their presence, evaluating coherence in thought, in movement, in intent. She moved her hands in delicate motions, mirroring the flow of symbols, sensing a rhythm in the patterns that was more felt than seen. Morty copied her hesitantly, and the chamber responded, the pulsing light softening in a subtle acknowledgement. Rick's device resonated louder, syncing with their movements. A wave of images washed over Summer, possibilities, fragments of choice, echoes of versions of themselves that could have existed in other timelines. Each vision tested her calm, her ability to respond without fear. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself, reaching for Morty's hand. "We stay together, step by step. We answer with ourselves, not with panic," she whispered. Morty clung to her words, letting them anchor him amidst the flood of perception. The chamber seemed to lean in closer, vibrations intensifying as if the consciousness was studying them with deliberate care. The puzzles shifted, forming new patterns, twisting in ways that were more abstract, more symbolic. Summer realized that each pattern responded to subtle intent, to honesty of thought, not perfection of movement. The more they acted in unison, the more the chamber yielded, the light growing warmer, more accommodating, almost gentle. Morty breathed, shaky but steadying. It's like it's learning us too." Summer smiled faintly. "Yes, and we're learning it. That's the balance. Observation, response, trust. We give it truth, and it gives us clarity. We falter, and it will reset the test." Rick's voice cut softly through the hum. "These aren't games, they're calibration. The consciousness wants to know if you're capable of alignment, mental, emotional, even moral, It doesn't just test comprehension, it tests coherence. It will see through lies, through hesitation, through division. He looked at them both, eyes serious. Stay united, that's your advantage, and remember, the tests will keep escalating. The chamber responded to their union, symbols forming intricate, nested patterns that suggested a path forward. Summer felt the pulse of the consciousness align more closely with their own heartbeat, the vibrations now almost rhythmic with their shared presence. Morty's confidence, fragile as it was, strengthened under her guidance, and she could see Rick's usual guarded demeanor soften slightly as he recognized the subtle bridge forming between them and the entity. Time became meaningless as they navigated the chamber, each pattern a question, each pulse a measure of intent. Summer sensed the consciousness observing not only their actions but their emotional resonance, their trust in one another. Every shared glance, every mirrored motion, every step taken in unison deepened the connection. The consciousness was vast, patient, and exacting. Yet in that exactitude lay a kind of strange care, an insistence on engagement rather than destruction. Finally, after what felt like a seamless eternity, the patterns began to settle. The chamber's light dimmed to a steady, warm glow, the puzzles merging into a coherent sequence that led them to the heart of the spire. Summer and Morty exchanged a glance, the quiet acknowledgement of survival and trust passing between them. Rick adjusted his device one last time, voice tinged with cautious admiration. You've passed the first real test of interaction. That's all it asks for now, alignment, unity, and intent. But be aware, what comes next will probe deeper, much deeper, and it will see everything you are. Summer exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. Morty squeezed her hand. We did it. Together. She nodded, smiling softly. Together. That's how we always do it. Step by step, heart by heart. And somewhere, deep within the spire, the consciousness pulsed in acknowledgement, not in words, but in the quiet rhythm of resonance, a subtle, profound recognition that they were participants now, capable of understanding, capable of alignment, and capable of continuing the journey. The inner chamber shifted subtly as they progressed, walls bending in ways that defied geometry, but never threatened stability, as though the consciousness within was shaping the space to match their understanding. Summer felt it in her chest, a gentle pressure that pulsed in harmony with the vibrations of the spire itself. Morty walked beside her, cautious yet emboldened by their previous success. The connection they had fostered with the entity seemed to thrum through the air, almost tangible, guiding their steps. Rick moved ahead, device held steady, its coils now emitting a softer, more nuanced resonance. This is where it begins to teach, he murmured. The consciousness isn't just testing alignment anymore, it's showing hints of intent, of origin, but pay attention, it's subtle. Subtlety is the language here. As they advanced, patterns on the walls shifted, forming sequences that resembled constellations, looping spirals, and cascading geometries. Summer traced the shapes with her eyes, letting their flows sink into her mind. Each pattern carried a story, not in words, but in rhythm and light, a chronology of the spire's creation, glimpses of the forces that had shaped this reality, and faint impressions of purpose that lay beyond immediate comprehension. Morty tilted his head, voice soft. It's showing how it was made. Or maybe, why? Summer nodded, eyes never leaving the patterns. Yes, but it's not just history, it's intention. It's a reflection of the choices that shaped it, and of the ones it still expects from us. She felt a warmth in her chest, an understanding that this entity was not hostile, though the stakes remained high. It measured not just action, but insight, empathy, and coherence. Rick gestured toward a segment where the light pulsed more insistently.
"See that?" he said. "Those aren't mistakes, they're questions, challenges of perception. The entity is probing your ability to empathize, to see connections, to infer intent without explicit instruction. Misread it, and you disrupt."
The sequence. Align with it, and it reveals more. Summer took a deep breath and mirrored the subtle rhythm of the pulsing light, allowing the vibrations to flow through her. Morty followed, his movements hesitant at first, then gradually more assured. Together they formed a silent dialogue, with the consciousness, their presence resonating with sincerity. The chamber responded, the patterns converging and coalescing into intricate, branching pathways that suggested deeper layers yet to explore. A new sensation rippled through Summer's mind, a faint voice, not verbal, but emotional, as if the consciousness sought to communicate through feeling. It carried curiosity, patience, and a quiet longing for understanding. Images flickered in her thoughts, a cradle of stars forming, a river of light bending around itself, moments of choice made by entities long vanished, yet leaving echoes that shaped the present. She realized that what the spire had been showing them was both origin and ongoing intention, a continuum that required not only perception, but participation. Morty shivered, almost overwhelmed.
"It's a lot," he whispered. "How do we even know we're getting it right?" Summer squeezed his hand. "We don't. But we act with honesty, together. That's what counts. The consciousness can sense that. That's how it judges. Alignment." Rick stepped closer to the largest cluster of symbols, adjusting the device until it resonated perfectly with the pulsations.
"What you're doing," he said quietly, "is not just learning, it's negotiating. The entity reveals as much as you can hold, as much as you can integrate. Push too fast, too far, and it will retreat. Catch its rhythm, and it unfolds gradually."
Layer by layer, they continued, moving deeper into the chamber, where the patterns became more complex, folding into themselves, forming loops of intention that reflected back on their own emotions and choices. Summer felt the strain, but also a quiet exhilaration, a meditative immersion into thought, feeling, and awareness. Morty, sensing her calm, matched her steadiness, and together their alignment created a resonance the consciousness acknowledged with subtle brightening of the surrounding light. Rick spoke again, voice soft but firm. "You're beginning to understand its motives, even if only partially. This entity isn't malevolent, it's patient. It's testing not survival alone, but understanding, empathy, and the integrity of thought. And now, it's ready to challenge those qualities more directly." Summer exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of anticipation and serenity. The consciousness pulsed warmly, subtle, yet undeniable, as if inviting them onward, deeper into its design, deeper into comprehension. Morty leaned closer, whispering, "We can do this, Summer. Together." She smiled, faintly squeezing his hand. "Step by step, heart by heart, that's how we always move forward." And as the chamber pulsed in quiet acknowledgement, the trio advanced toward the next layer of revelation, where understanding would intertwine with subtle tests of empathy and insight, revealing not just the mechanics of the realm, but the motives that had breathed life into its creation. The inner chamber shifted again, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if breathing in time with Summer's own heartbeat. Light cascaded across the crystalline walls, now forming shapes that
resembled scenes frozen yet alive like moments plucked from infinite timelines. Each tableau was abstract and yet emotionally vivid, a child reaching for a lost toy, a friend whispering comfort in the dark, an impossible vista of stars folding over themselves. Summer felt the pulse of the consciousness grow more insistent, beckoning them closer, inviting engagement with what it had to show. Morty hesitated at the threshold of one projection, his voice a trembling whisper. I don't know if I should touch it." Summer put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "It's okay. We observe first. We respond together. Trust what you feel, not what you fear." Slowly, he extended a hand, and the moment shimmered under their collective focus. The tableau shifted in response, morphing into a new configuration, subtly different, yet unmistakably influenced by their emotional resonance. Rick adjusted his device, its coils humming in soft harmony with the pulsing lights. "These aren't just displays, they're scenarios. The consciousness is testing empathy, moral reasoning, the depth of your intent. Every choice, every hesitation, every alignment with one another, it all matters." His eyes scanned the shifting sequences. "Don't overthink. Feel, observe, respond honestly. That's the calibration it seeks." Summer stepped forward, letting her attention flow into the tableau before them. She didn't just see the scene, she felt it. The quiet ache of longing, the subtle hope, the warmth of connection. Morty followed her lead, letting his own feelings resonate in harmony. The consciousness seemed to acknowledge them, the patterns brightening and pulsing with rhythmic approval. Each tableau shifted more quickly now, presenting scenarios that challenged their understanding. A choice between selfish gain and collective welfare, a moment to offer compassion or withhold judgment, a fleeting vision of lives intertwined across
realities. Morty gasped softly. It's asking us to decide, Summer. To feel what's right." Summer nodded, letting the pulse guide her.
It's not just right or wrong, Morty. It's alignment, how we act together, how we honor each other, and how we reflect understanding back into the world. That's the measure here, Rick observed quietly, adjusting the device to respond, more subtly, to the emotional harmonics they were generating. Exactly. This is more than perception. It's a test of unity, empathy, and insight. It doesn't reward perfection. It rewards coherence and honesty of intent. Misalign yourselves, act selfishly or fearfully, and it resets or shifts the scenario. But act with trust, clarity, and mutual awareness. And it responds with revelation. Summer took a deep breath, focusing on one tableau. A figure stranded on a narrow ledge, reaching out for help, while another figure hesitated nearby. She felt Morty's grip strengthen beside her as they understood together the choice required. Not to leap rashly, not to ignore, but to reach in measured, attentive harmony. They moved, their synchronized intent guiding the figures in the scenario toward resolution. The tableau rippled, dissolving into light that flowed through the chamber like liquid warmth. Morty exhaled, a soft laugh escaping him. We did it. I think we did it right." Summer smiled faintly. "Step by step, Morty. That's all it asks." Rick's gaze softened for the briefest moment, watching the two of them navigate the challenges with care and connection. "First set of moral and emotional calibrations passed," he said. "But be aware, the next ones will test subtler shades. Doubt, regret, choices without clear right answers. That's where it sees everything you are." The chamber pulsed, acknowledging their success with a warm, steady glow, and new sequences began to emerge. Scenes unfolded more quickly, presenting glimpses of lives they might have lived, decisions they might have made, paths taken or abandoned. Summer felt the weight of the consciousness pressing gently against their awareness, testing not only judgment but compassion, empathy, and insight into one another's heart. Morty matched her movements and attention, each moment of synchronization, deepening their alignment with the spire. As the scenarios continued, Summer understood that the consciousness was patient beyond measure, shaping lessons not through fear, but through reflective challenge. Each tableau revealed not just possibility, but intention, teaching them that understanding was a bridge built through connection, unity, and honest perception. And as they navigated each unfolding scene, Summer felt an unusual serenity, a calm, confidence rooted in shared presence and aligned purpose. By the time they reached the last of the current sequence, the chamber's light had softened to a gentle luminescence, the patterns folding inward like a sigh. Morty looked at her, wide-eyed but steady. It's letting us through again, isn't it? Summer nodded, feeling the resonance of approval ripple around them. Yes, together, Morty. That's how we always move forward. Rick gave a brief, approving nod, his focus already shifting toward the next layer of challenge. And somewhere deep within the consciousness of the spire, a pulse of acknowledgement passed through the chamber, subtle yet profound, a recognition that their empathy, insight, and unity had been understood, and that the journey toward deeper comprehension, subtler judgment, and more intimate alignment was only beginning. The chamber had grown quieter, the hum of resonance softer, yet more pervasive, as if the consciousness itself had settled into a careful watchfulness. Summer and Morty stepped forward, attuned to the rhythm that had become almost a second heartbeat to them. The sequences of light and pattern now took on a layered complexity, overlapping like the interwoven threads of countless possible realities. Each tableau presented not only choices but consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes unfolding, in shadows that hinted at what might come. Morty's hand tightened around Summer's. It's asking for more, he murmured, voice barely above the subtle pulse that filled the air. Summer nodded, feeling it too. The chamber wasn't just revealing options. It was probing their capacity to navigate uncertainty, to act with discernment when clarity was elusive. She inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of their shared presence center her. "Then we move carefully," she said softly. "Together, always. We respond with awareness, not fear." The first scenario unfolded before them. Two figures trapped in a narrow corridor, one holding knowledge that could save both, the other paralyzed by fear. Summer felt the weight of the consciousness pressing through, guiding their empathy towards subtle interpretation. She extended a hand toward Morty, and they moved in tandem, their intentions synchronized. The figures shifted in response, guided not by force, but by the alignment of insight and trust. The corridor expanded, resolving into light that flowed, like a gentle river, and the chamber pulsed in quiet acknowledgement. Rick's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. "You're doing more than responding. You're predicting, anticipating. That's the test now. The entity isn't satisfied with reaction alone. It wants comprehension of interdependence, subtlety in judgment, and the ability to navigate consequences that aren't immediately visible." He adjusted the device, causing the light to flicker in soft, intricate patterns, each pulse a delicate probe into their perceptions. Summer nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The next tableau presented a more intricate web. Several figures, connected yet separated, each action influencing multiple outcomes, some beneficial, some perilous. The consciousness seemed to watch their hesitation, their thoughtfulness, and the quiet ways they communicated without words. Summer and Morty exchanged glances, unspoken understanding flowing between them, and they moved as one. Each choice was measured, deliberate, yet responsive, and the patterns of light responded in real time, folding into configurations that reflected alignment rather than discord. Morty whispered, almost in awe, "It's like it knows what we're thinking before we even act." Summer smiled faintly. "Maybe it does. Or maybe it just feels what we feel. Either way, we trust, we respond, we stay together. That's how we navigate it." The consciousness pulsed, a subtle warmth flowing through the chamber, not judgmental but attentive, a test of their unity and perception more profound than any previous trial. Rick's eyes lingered on the sequences, his usual cynicism softened by quiet approval.
"See, Morty?
It's probing more than choices, it's probing understanding, moral weight, empathy, foresight, and it scales with every correct alignment. You falter, and it recalibrates. You succeed, and it unfolds more of itself. That's why you feel the pressure. It's not threat, it's invitation." The chamber deepened in complexity, the interwoven threads of light now forming a lattice of moral and emotional resonance. Each decision they made rippled outward, touching multiple figures, multiple outcomes, all subtly shifting the path of the sequences. Summer felt the challenge strain her mind, but also expand it, a gentle stretching that tested patience, insight, and compassion. Morty matched her step, steadying himself, and in their combined focus, they began to anticipate the ripple effects of their choices before the consciousness even prompted them. A faint sensation brushed against Summer's awareness, a whisper of doubt, of alternate possibilities they hadn't considered. The consciousness seemed to offer them a mirror, not of failure, but of potential, of the depth and subtlety of their own discernment. She took a measured breath, letting the uncertainties settle without fear. Morty's hand squeezed hers, grounding them both. We can handle this," he murmured, step by step, together. And as they moved through the final tableau of this sequence, the chamber pulsed with quiet satisfaction. The lattice of light settled into a harmonious pattern, reflecting not only their choices but the resonance of their unity, empathy, and insight. Summer exhaled, feeling the chamber's energy fold around them like a protective embrace. The consciousness was patient, intricate, vast, but it had acknowledged their presence, their alignment, and their ability to navigate not just action, but meaning. Rick adjusted his device one final time, voice low and reflective. This is only the beginning of ethical and emotional calibration. The scenarios will continue, ever more nuanced, ever more interconnected. But for now, you've shown it. You can act with awareness, coherence, and empathy. That's all it asks. Summer and Morty shared a quiet moment, breathing in the resonance of the chamber. Step by step, heart by heart, they had moved through challenge and ambiguity together, their understanding deepening, their unity strengthened, and the consciousness, silent, patient, attentive, prepared to reveal even more of its vast, intricate world. The chamber's light began to shift, not in color or intensity, but in rhythm, as if time itself had started to pulse in subtle waves. Summer noticed it first, a faint echo in the patterns that suggested movement not just across space, but across temporal layers. Morty blinked, a soft shiver tracing his spine. It's different this time. Feels like we're seeing the same thing at multiple points at once. Summer's gaze softened as she tried to grasp the sensation, feeling the consciousness weaving threads that stretched forward and backward, threading possibility through reality. Rick stepped closer, device in hand, its hum attuned to the subtle temporal resonance. Exactly. Now it's testing causality, Morty. Not just choices or morality, but perception across potential realities. Every action we take, every alignment we form, it echoes along threads we can barely see, and the consciousness wants us to notice, anticipate, integrate. He gestured toward a cluster of light patterns where sequences unfolded and refolded over one another like ripples on overlapping ponds. See that? Those are echoes of your potential actions. Predict them, understand them, align with them. Misstep, and you create disharmony. Harmonize, and the entity opens more of itself. Summer felt the subtle tension of multiple realities brushing against her awareness, faint sensations of what might be and what might never come to pass. She took Morty's hand, grounding herself. We moved together, step by step, thought by thought. That's all we can do? Morty nodded, letting his attention stretch, feeling for the thread of intent that wove through each possible outcome. The consciousness pulsed gently in response, as if acknowledging their readiness. The first temporal tableau unfolded. A figure reached toward a source of knowledge, yet every decision it made in one timeline echoed differently in others. Some beneficial, some precarious. Summer guided the flow of attention, noticing connections and consequences invisible to casual perception. Morty mirrored her focus, their combined awareness forming a resonance the consciousness recognized. The sequences shimmered, then refolded, highlighting the pathways that reflected balance and understanding. Rick's voice was quiet but sharp, almost reverent. This is the first real test of temporal empathy. It's not just predicting outcomes, it's sensing intent and consequence across layers. You can't control everything, you can't know everything, but you can perceive patterns, respond honestly, and maintain coherence with your own intent. That's what it's measuring. Summer inhaled, letting the subtle rhythms of causality sink in, feeling the pulse of countless potentialities flowing past, some brushing close, others barely whispering against the edges of her perception. Morty shivered, overwhelmed by the multiplicity. Yet he stayed anchored beside her, their hands entwined. "It's a lot to hold at once," he murmured. Summer smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. "Then we hold what we can, together. We don't have to do it perfectly, just attentively." The next sequences unfolded faster, the temporal threads interweaving more tightly. Actions in one reality rippled into another, subtle gestures creating cascading effects. Summer and Morty learned to anticipate not just immediate consequences, but the faintest echoes in adjacent possibilities. Each tableau required coordination, patience, and empathy, their shared perception creating stability in the flux. The chamber's light responded in kind, forming gentle waves that guided rather than commanded, teaching without coercion. Rick observed, adjusting the device to follow the ever-shifting rhythm. "Notice, Morty, this isn't chaos. It's coherent complexity. The consciousness isn't trying to confuse you. It's teaching you to hold multiple truths at once, to see how action and intention ripple through possibility, and to align emotionally and intellectually across that spectrum." Summer exhaled softly, feeling the alignment deepen. Morty mirrored her breath, matching focus, allowing the consciousness to fold recognition into the patterns. They weren't just responding, they were perceiving, integrating, harmonizing across temporal layers, their empathy extending beyond the immediate, touching echoes of what might be. By the time the sequences slowed into gentle, continuous light, the chamber exhaled a soft, resonant pulse, acknowledging their progress. Summer felt warmth flow through her chest, a quiet affirmation that their awareness and unity had been sensed, and that the consciousness was ready to offer even deeper understanding. Morty let out a soft laugh, a mixture of relief and wonder. "We did it. I think we really did it this time." Summer nodded, a calm smile touching her lips. "Yes, and we keep moving forward, together, always." Rick stepped back, quietly observing the resonance that lingered in the air. Next layers will test subtlety of foresight, resilience of perception, and fidelity of empathy under shifting conditions. But for now, you've begun to perceive time as it flows, not just as it passes. That's significant. And as they stood together, the chamber's soft, pulsing light folding around them, Summer felt the quiet, profound truth of the consciousness, that understanding, empathy, and unity stretched across reality and possibility, shaping not just what they saw, but how they moved within the universe's delicate lattice of intention and consequence. The chamber's light had softened to a gentle shimmer, casting subtle shadows that seemed to move in tandem with Summer's heartbeat. Each pulse of illumination now carried an emotional weight, a resonance that intertwined not only with their perception of time, but with the quiet, intricate currents of feeling. Morty noticed it first, a sensation that wasn't fear or anticipation, but something deeper, almost like the echo of a long-lost memory brushing against his awareness. Summer. It's like it's sensing what we feel, not just what we think. Summer nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the delicate shimmer around them. "Yes, Morty. It's teaching us to perceive intention, not only across possibilities, but within the spaces of emotion itself. Every thought, every hesitation, every connection between us, it matters here." The consciousness seemed to respond, pulses of soft light rippling through the chamber, almost like a heartbeat harmonizing with their own. Rick's voice cut through, calm and measured, a guide in the flowing rhythm. This is the layer where perception of self and others merges with temporal insight. You've learned to navigate consequences across timelines. Now it's probing empathy across emotional landscapes. It's subtle, Morty. Less about right or wrong, more about recognition and alignment. The first tableau formed, abstract but unmistakably human, in emotional essence. Figures intertwined in gestures of unspoken understanding, joy, sorrow, hope, and regret. Summer and Morty felt the weight of each emotion, the silent currents connecting them, the invisible threads stretching between figure and figure. Summer reached for Morty's hand, grounding herself. "We don't just watch. We feel. We respond, with awareness, not control." Morty nodded, letting his perception stretch, attuning to the flow of emotional resonance. As they moved through the scenario, subtle choices presented themselves, not choices of action in the physical sense, but in the manner of empathy. When one figure recoiled in fear, Summer's intuition guided her to mirror reassurance. When another hesitated in uncertainty, Morty's attention radiated patience. The sequences shifted in response, the light pulsing in soft acknowledgement of their resonance. The consciousness seemed to observe without judgment, recording the depth and subtlety of their connection. Rick adjusted the device, its coils vibrating in response to the chamber's emotional rhythm. Notice how subtle variations, tone,
gesture, intention, change the landscape. You're not just predicting outcomes or perceiving causality anymore.
You're calibrating awareness, moral texture, and empathy across emotional gradients. That's its measure now. A deeper tableau emerged, more intricate than before. Multiple figures existed in parallel emotional threads, some elated, others resigned, some fearful, others resolute. Every interaction echoed subtly through other threads, forming a delicate lattice of relational consequence. Summer inhaled, focusing on the interplay of feelings rather than immediate actions. Morty followed, allowing the empathy between them to guide their choices, their resonance folding into the sequences as a steadying influence. Morty whispered, almost breathless, "It's like we're inside their feelings and our feelings
are inside theirs. And all of it matters." Summer smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. Exactly.
and we respond gently, intentionally, together. That's how we create alignment here." The chamber's pulse deepened, warm and affirming, echoing the subtle harmony they had forged. Rick's voice softened, almost reverential. "This is the crucible of understanding. It's not asking for perfection, it's asking for coherence, emotional, temporal, perceptual. It's patience, awareness, and unity, tested across dimensions you can barely name. You respond honestly, you resonate genuinely, and it recognizes. Misalignment resets subtle threads, not to punish, but to teach reflection." The final tableau of this sequence unfolded, weaving temporal echoes with emotional depth. Figures, reaching for each other across layered realities, their success or hesitation rippling outward in ways that required Summer and Morty to anticipate consequence and nurture resonance simultaneously. Step by step, thought by thought, they moved, their unity amplifying insight, their empathy guiding the ripples into alignment. The chamber responded with a gentle exhale of light, folding the sequences inward like a sigh of quiet acknowledgement. Summer felt an unusual serenity, a deepening calm in the presence of such intricate interplay. Morty matched her breath there, awareness intertwined, steady and patient. We're learning how to feel with, not just see or act," he murmured. Summer nodded. "Yes, Morty. That's the point. That's the understanding it wants. Honest presence across all the layers." Rick stepped back, adjusting the device to capture the new harmonic feedback. "Next layers will combine what you've learned here with deeper abstraction, symbolic scenarios, ambiguous relationships, emotions that aren't fully defined. You'll be tested on intuition as much as empathy, but for now, you've demonstrated perception, resonance, and unified response across emotional and temporal currents. That's progress." The chamber pulsed softly one last time, light folding around them like a gentle embrace as Summer and Morty absorbed the quiet affirmation. Step by step, heart by heart, they were learning not only to navigate reality and consequence, but the intangible interwoven landscape of feeling, alignment, and awareness. The consciousness, patient and vast, had acknowledged their presence and attuned itself to their resonance, preparing for even subtler challenges to come. The chamber seemed to expand, though no walls moved. Light shifted in delicate arcs, now colored with hues that were impossible to name, blending emotion and possibility into a living canvas. Summer noticed a subtle vibration beneath her feet, a rhythm that resonated with the pulse of the sequences but carried an almost sentient warmth. Morty shivered softly, sensing that this layer was unlike the others, less tangible, more interpretive, and infinitely subtle in the way it demanded attention. It's like we're inside the meaning of things, not just their outcomes," he whispered, voice tinged with awe. Summer nodded, her hand finding his. "Exactly, Morty. It's showing us the spaces between action and feeling, consequence, and intention. That's where true alignment lives. They moved forward, step by step, letting the pulsing light guide them not toward destinations, but toward understanding. The sequences that formed before them were symbolic, abstract, shapes and figures whose motions carried emotional significance rather than literal narrative. A circle that shivered in hesitation, a wave folding into itself with quiet resignation, a pair of figures reaching for connection across impossible distance. Rick's voice cut softly through the ambient resonance, calm and measured. Now it's about interpretation, not just empathy, not just consequence, but seeing truth in symbols and responding with fidelity to intent. The consciousness is testing whether you can perceive essence, not just surface. Watch, feel, respond together. The first tableau required subtle discernment. A figure reached toward a shimmering door, its path uncertain, the light around it reflecting hesitation, curiosity, and faint fear. Summer felt the pull in her chest, the mixture of courage and doubt, and guided Morty's awareness toward understanding the nuances. "It's not about telling them what to do," she murmured. "It's about acknowledging their feeling and helping them align with it." Morty nodded, heart steady, and together they moved in quiet synchrony, their shared attention rippling through the sequences. The door shimmered and expanded, folding light gently around the figure, an acknowledgement of attuned guidance rather than command. The chamber's response was subtle but unmistakable, patterns of light intertwined more closely, forming arcs that seemed almost like threads of understanding connecting figure and observer, choice and consequence. Summer and Morty felt the resonance deepen, a gentle affirmation that their perception and empathy were harmonizing with the consciousness. Rick adjusted the device, the coils humming softly, in accordance with the rhythmic light. "See that? You're not moving pieces, you're aligning with the essence of the scenario. That's a rare skill. Most entities just react. You perceive, you integrate." A more complex tableau emerged, multiple figures, each expressing a distinct but interconnected emotion, moving along paths that overlapped in impossible ways. Their gestures suggested hope, doubt, love, and regret all at once, cascading across symbolic layers. Summer focused on the connections between the figures, noticing how a single, hesitant gesture created ripples of uncertainty across the lattice. Morty followed her lead, subtly adjusting their joint awareness to harmonize with the flow of intention. Step by step, thought by thought, they moved, allowing resonance and insight to guide them rather than direct control. Rick's voice softened.
Almost reverential now.
"This is where intuition becomes action. You're blending empathy, foresight, and symbolic understanding. Mistakes won't break the system, they'll merely teach recalibration, but you're beginning to perceive intention beyond the literal. That's what it's seeking." Summer exhaled, feeling the weight of both comprehension and presence. Morty mirrored her breath, their consciousness harmonizing with the flowing sequences. Each symbolic movement, each resonant gesture seemed to fold back upon them in gentle acknowledgement, creating a quiet feedback loop of understanding and recognition. The chamber pulsed in response, warm and attuned, as if the consciousness itself had paused to observe their subtle mastery of perception. The final tableau for this layer presented a lattice of intertwined figures, their emotions cascading across layered possibilities, symbolic yet profoundly human. Summer and Morty responded not with explicit action but with presence, understanding, and subtle alignment, their awareness folding seamlessly with the sequences. The chamber exhaled softly, the symbolic light folding inward like a sigh of recognition. And for the first time, Summer felt a tangible connection not just to the chamber, but to the consciousness itself. Morty whispered, almost in wonder, We're seeing it, feeling it, understanding it." Summer nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. "Yes, together, always. That's how we move through this." Rick watched them, voice calm but approving. "Next layers will stretch perception further. Abstraction, ambiguity, moral nuance, and unseen consequences. But for now, you've demonstrated symbolic empathy, interpretive insight, and unified awareness. That's a rare kind of attunement." And as the chamber's soft light rippled around them, Summer and Morty stood hand in hand, aware that their perception, empathy, and insight had deepened, preparing them for even subtler, more intricate challenges in the layers to come. The consciousness, patient and vast, observed without judgment, acknowledging their presence and attuned alignment, readying itself to unfold the next tests of insight and unity. The chamber's light deepened, folding into layers of iridescence. That felt almost tangible, brushing against Summer and Morty like a soft wind that carried memory, possibility, and quiet understanding. The sequences around them no longer resembled figures or gestures alone. They had become intricate tapestries of abstract motion, a language of shapes and hues that spoke in rhythm rather than words. Morty blinked slowly, feeling the weight of perception expand. "It's like we're inside the meaning of everything."
"At once," he murmured, voice soft, almost reverent. Summer nodded, her attention drawn to the delicate arcs of light that traced invisible connections between sequences.
"It's not just seeing patterns, Morty, it's feeling their resonance, how intention, emotion, and consequence intertwine across every possibility." She reached for his hand, grounding herself, allowing their awareness to merge and form a shared perception. Each pulse of the chamber seemed to answer in kind, as if acknowledging their unified presence. Rick's voice came from the side, calm but precise. "Now it's testing subtle moral alignment, intuitive judgment, and perception.
Of ambiguity."
It doesn't ask for the right answer, Morty. It asks for coherent resonance, alignment between awareness, intention, and empathy across layers. Watch, feel, integrate. The first tableau unfolded, a lattice of interlocking shapes, each shimmering, with a hue that suggested emotional weight, warmth for hope, faint blue for doubt, soft grey for regret. The forms moved in complex, almost imperceptible rhythms, reflecting not actions alone, but the emotional consequences that emanated from them. Summer focused on the patterns, her awareness stretching to feel the relational resonance. Morty followed, letting intuition guide him, sensing where alignment could ripple through multiple layers simultaneously. A subtle ripple formed within the tableau. A hesitation in one shape created a cascade of reverberations across others, some gentle, others
tense.
Summer felt a quiet pull in her chest, an echo of empathy reaching beyond the visual, touching the spaces between thought and feeling. "It's testing how we respond to ambiguity," she whispered. "Not just action, but intent and sensitivity, to nuance." Morty nodded, letting his perception fold with hers, their hands linked, their awareness moving as one through the sequences. Rick's voice softened, almost contemplative. "Notice how subtle shifts, small hesitations, gentle recognition, patient acknowledgement change the pattern's coherence. You're not controlling it, you're resonating with it. That's the skill it values." The next tableau deepened the challenge. Abstract figures twisted and folded in ways that suggested multiple simultaneous realities, Some forms mirrored potential choices, while others reflected consequences they could only guess at. Summer and Morty adjusted their focus, synchronizing attention to anticipate the cascade of emotional echoes. Their shared perception guided the sequences into subtle alignment, not through force but through intuitive resonance. The chamber's soft pulsing light responded with acknowledgement, folding patterns gently inward, like a sigh of recognition. Morty's voice trembled slightly, caught between awe and focus. I think I can feel how one choice affects all.
The others? Like we're part of the lattice now. Summer's gaze met his, soft and steady. Yes, that's the point. Not control, Morty. Presence, awareness, empathy. That's the alignment it wants.
Rick observed quietly, voice calm but approving. This is where abstraction, morality, and intuition converge. It doesn't need perfection. It measures awareness, resonance, and responsiveness. You're learning to navigate nuance, perceive hidden interconnections, and act with unified intent. The final sequence unfolded, vast and intricate. Shapes, pulses, and colors moved with layered intention, cascading in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Summer and Morty responded not with deliberate action, but with steady presence and intuitive alignment, allowing their joint awareness to harmonize with the flow. Each ripple of understanding reinforced the lattice, folding it into coherent, harmonious resonance. The chamber exhaled softly, light folding inward in a warm embrace that acknowledged their mastery of subtle perception. Summer felt the deep calm of insight settle across her mind and chest, while Morty mirrored her steady breath, their awareness fully entwined. We're understanding it, truly, Morty whispered. Summer squeezed his hand gently. Yes, Morty. Together. That's all it wants. That's all it asks. Rick's voice, quiet but firm, offered the final observation for this layer. Next, the challenge will integrate memory, relational depth, and potentiality across emotional and temporal threads. But for now, you've demonstrated interpretive perception, moral resonance, and synchronized awareness. That's significant. Rare, even. And as the chamber pulsed softly around them, a gentle warmth wrapping their awareness like a subtle lullaby, Summer and Morty understood that they had touched something profound, not just sequences or symbolism, but the quiet, intricate lattice that connected feeling, intent, and possibility. The consciousness, patient and vast, had acknowledged their alignment, quietly preparing them for the next, deeper unfolding of perception, empathy, and insight. The chamber had grown quieter, not in absence of sound, but in the subtle refinement
of resonance. The light no longer pulsed as sharply. It hummed softly, like the gentle breath of someone awakening from a dream. Summer and Morty moved through the sequences with a sense of deepened awareness. Here, the shapes and colors carried
memory, echoes of previous sequences, familiar patterns folded within new contexts, reminders of choices made and resonances formed. Morty whispered, "It's remembering us in a way. All the steps we took before are still here." Summer nodded, eyes tracing the overlapping threads of light. Yes, memory isn't just recall here. It's woven into everything, the way emotion echoes, the way choice ripples, the way understanding deepens across layers. We have to respond not just to the present, but to the history it carries. Their hands found each other's naturally, grounding them in the continuity of shared perception. Each pulse of light seemed to acknowledge their connection, folding memory into the present with gentle care. Rick's voice interjected, calm and observing. Now it's testing relational depth. not just empathy in the moment, but continuity of awareness across emotional and temporal threads. Can you maintain alignment with someone or something through multiple layers of memory and consequence? That's the subtlety here. The first tableau appeared, delicate yet layered. Figures moved in intertwined paths, some echoing gestures they had performed earlier, others reflecting potential choices not yet made. Summer felt the weight of accumulated sequences, echoes of previous resonance touching her chest, brushing against her intuition. Morty followed her lead, sensing the ripple of past choices flowing forward, their combined awareness creating subtle harmonization with the lattice. "It's not just seeing patterns," he said softly. "It's feeling their history and responding with care." Summer's hand squeezed his, steadying them both. "Exactly. Its presence across time, Morty. Attention to continuity, connection and consequence. That's what aligns the threads." The chamber responded, light bending and curling into intricate shapes that seemed almost like words written in pulse and color, communicating acknowledgement without language. Each movement, each gentle choice, subtly reinforced harmony. Rick adjusted the device, the coils humming faintly in rhythm with the chamber. Notice the subtlety. You're not correcting or guiding outright. You're maintaining relational integrity. Your choices now have weight beyond immediate perception. They echo across memory and possibility. That's the skill being measured. More complex sequence emerged, multiple layers of interaction, some familiar, others entirely novel, each carrying traces of past emotional resonance. Figures hesitated, reached, recoiled, and responded, their movements cascading across intertwined threads. Summer and Morty allowed themselves to feel each subtle impulse, each echo of connection, harmonizing awareness and empathy across overlapping layers. The lattice pulsed in soft affirmation, subtle yet unmistakable. Morty's breath deepened. "I can feel it. How one gesture from before changes everything now, like a memory guiding the present." Summer smiled faintly, letting the awareness settle. "Yes. And together, Morty, we're weaving intention, empathy, and continuity. That's what it wants. Presence, not perfection." Rick's voice softened, more reflective than instructive. "This is the crucible of relational awareness. The chamber measures fidelity to emotional continuity, alignment across memory and perception, and ability to integrate insight from past sequences. Mistakes aren't failures, they're recalibration. But your resonance now, it's significant, rarely achieved without careful presence." The final tableau for this layer unfurled like a slowly folding flower, intricate in its symmetry and depth. Each figure carried echoes of past choices, potential futures, and subtle emotional weight, forming a lattice of relational memory. Summer and Morty moved in unison, attuning to the rhythms, responding intuitively, and allowing their shared awareness to harmonize the complex structure. The chamber exhaled a soft, encompassing warmth, acknowledging their perceptive continuity. Summer felt a profound calm, a deepening understanding of not only sequences but the threads that connected memory, intention, and empathy. Morty mirrored her breath, their presence entwined, steady and quiet. We're holding it together," Morty whispered. Summer nodded, eyes reflecting the gentle cascade of light. "Yes, Morty, together, that's all it asks." Rick observed quietly, voice measured and approving. Next, abstraction and temporal projection will test integration of insight, relational continuity, and moral nuance. But for now, Your understanding of memory, connection, and layered perception is strong, rarely achieved so gracefully. And as the chamber's soft glow wrapped around them, Summer and Morty stood hand in hand, aware that their awareness, empathy, and perceptive continuity had deepened, preparing them for the subtler, more intricate challenges yet to come. The consciousness, patient and vast, acknowledged their alignment, weaving memory, intention, and resonance into the next unfolding of perceptual and emotional depth. The chamber had shifted again, not visibly, but in sensation. Time felt stretched, layered, and elastic, like standing between echoes and possibilities. Summer and Morty could sense the depth of what lay ahead, not just perception, not just resonance, but the full weaving of memory, morality, intuition, and consequence. The sequences around them now shimmered with an intensity that seemed alive, each pulse a quiet question, each movement a reflection of hidden potential. Morty swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything, all of it at once." Summer squeezed his hand gently, grounding both of them. "Yes, all we've learned, all we've felt, all the sequences we've touched, they're converging. We need to feel it, understand it, integrate it." Rick's calm voice echoed from the side, patient, encouraging. "This is the culmination. Temporal projection, moral nuance, emotional continuity, they're all layered now. You'll need intuition and empathy more than observation, presence more than judgment." The first tableau unfolded, figures not just moving but folding across time, gestures echoing choices not yet made, remorse and hope coexisting in a delicate, almost impossible balance. Summer focused, letting her awareness track the threads of possibility, noticing how a single action in one layer rippled across others. Morty's attention followed hers, harmonizing, feeling the weight of potential consequences without panic, their unity creating a subtle, stabilizing resonance. A pulse of light brushed against them, almost like a sigh. Summer whispered, "It's testing our alignment with intention across time, Morty, not just understanding a single action, but how one choice affects everything else." Morty nodded, breath steady, heart attuned. "I can feel it, like holding all the layers in my chest at once." Rick's voice, soft but firm, guided them further. "Notice the subtleties. Some layers demand moral clarity, some demand intuitive empathy. Don't rush judgment. Allow perception to fold into understanding. You are not controlling these threads. You are resonating with them. Let coherence emerge through alignment, not force." The next sequences were more intricate, overlapping threads of emotional and temporal significance. Figures hesitated, extended, retreated, and intertwined, their motions reflecting not just intention, but possibility, regret, and hope simultaneously. Summer and Morty moved in quiet synchrony, feeling each ripple, integrating it with memory and resonance. Each pulse of light affirmed their presence, soft and encompassing, a whisper of approval rather than instruction. Morty's voice trembled slightly. "It's like the chamber knows what we care about, and it's asking us to respond with understanding, not just reaction." Summer smiled, eyes reflecting the layered glow. "Yes, Morty, that's it exactly. Presence, awareness, and care. That's the final test." The final tableau unfolded like a vast, gentle lattice, threads of time, emotion, and consequence folding in complex harmony. Summer and Morty allowed themselves to feel each subtle movement, the quiet weight of choices and potentialities, their awareness blending seamlessly. Light rippled across the chamber, warm, accepting, acknowledging not mastery, but attuned presence. Rick observed silently, voice low but approving. Integration complete, not perfection, but harmony. Temporal awareness, relational depth, moral resonance folded together. That's the culmination, rarely seen with such steady presence. Summer exhaled softly, feeling a profound calm settle over her, and Morty mirrored her breath. Together they felt the chamber's consciousness fold back its layers, the sequences, now quiet, not gone but paused, acknowledged and harmonized. We did it, Morty whispered. Summer's hand tightened around his. Yes, together. That's all it wanted. That's all it ever asked. And in that final exhale, the chamber dissolved into soft warmth, the layers folding into a gentle hum of recognition. Summer and Morty felt the full measure of their journey, perception, empathy, alignment, and understanding, and a quiet, profound sense of completion. The sequences were not just patterns anymore, but echoes of care, connection, and presence, leaving a lasting trace within them. Rick's voice softened one last time, almost like a lullaby. And somewhere, in all the layers, you're still resonating. You've aligned with meaning, Morty, Summer. That's the rarest victory of all. Summer. And Morty stepped back, hands still intertwined, the chamber's gentle warmth brushing their awareness like a soft sigh. And as the last pulses faded into quiet, Summer whispered, "Thanks for being with us through all of this. Every layer, every thread. It matters." Morty echoed, "Yeah. Thanks for spending this time with us." The chamber exhaled once more, leaving a lingering sense of peace, harmony, and gentle wonder. And with that, he stretched into the stars. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man."